We know that Democrats are enraged about losing the 2016 election and the Kavanaugh confirmation battle. Over on MSNBC, Chris Matthews summed up the mood pretty nicely.
The base will attack the leadership for this if they allow it to happen, and they should, because this is time for vengeance for what happened 2 years ago.
Vengeance, yes indeed. And here's the plan. Nowhere does it say the Supreme Court has to be made up of 9 justices, not in the Constitution, not in any amendment, nowhere. And that fact makes the idea of court packing possible. First discussed 80 years ago by FDR, court packing means adding extra judges to the High Court to create a new ideological majority. It may sound crazy, and it goes along with other Democratic ideas to change the rules of the game when they're losing, like abolishing the Electoral College and reducing the number of red state senators. But believe me, court packing will be a mainstream idea on the left by the 2020 election. In fact, Michael Avenatti, yes, him again, called for it just yesterday. Someone else who's argued for it publicly is David Farris, who's a political science professor at Roosevelt University and author of It's Time to Fight Dirty, How Democrats Can Build a Lasting Majority in American Politics. And David Farris joins me now. David, presumably you've made this argument that you want the Democratic president, as you hope it will be in 2020, to add another 2 to make it 11. You'd be all right with a Republican president in 2024 or 2028, boosting it up to 13. You'd be okay with that, right?
Well, one thing I want to say, and I've said this in everything I've written about this subject publicly, is that what I really want, what I'd really prefer, and I hate to disappoint you, is a compromise. And the compromise would be a constitutional amendment that eliminates lifetime tenure on the Supreme Court. That amendment would work a series of magical things, okay? It would reduce the zero-sum character of court appointments and court nominations. And it would allow the Supreme Court to more closely reflect the outcome of presidential elections, right? And so that we could reduce the temperature on these appointments by guaranteeing every president the right to nominate 2 justices per 4-year term. So, but yes, you're right. I think if that compromise is rejected, then I do endorse expanding the Supreme Court by at least 2 seats, depending on how many it takes to produce a liberal majority in 2021.
Just to be clear, you also support a Republican president increasing by another 2 seats afterwards, yes?
I don't see much of a functional difference between what we have now.
Sorry, was that a yes?
Yes, I do, yeah.
So you're okay with the Republican president doing it?
What I would say is that the difference between...
I'm just trying to understand if you're okay with it, if a Republican president does it or not.
Yeah, I already said yes, but what I'm trying to say is that the difference between what we have now and the difference between Republican escalation is nothing, right? Like, if Democrats increase the size of the court, they'll control the court for 2 years or 4 years or 8 years or whatever it is. Republicans will respond, right? And then we'll have control of the court flipping back and forth
you've just made the
based on the winner of the presidential election.
Sorry to cut you off there, but I think you've just made the argument perfectly why this is such a sort of total look, even I, as a British person, relatively newly here, understand that the whole point of the Supreme Court is to be different to the branches to the branch that is part of democratic politics. It's not supposed to reflect the political moment. It's supposed to judge the law, not make the law. Aren't you arguing for something that is totally at odds with the whole basis of the court?
No, I'm not. And what I would point out is that if you have a constitutional amendment that gives every president the right to appoint 2 justices per 4-year term, we would reduce the partisan anger around these appointments because it would make it possible for you to recapture the court in 4 or 8 years, right?
Hang on, aren't you asking?
What Democrats really fear.
Partisan?
No.
Anyway,
the constitutional amendment would make it less partisan, Steve.
I want to get the others in on this, and then we'll come back to you, David, if you don't mind hanging on there for a second. Let's start with Greg. What do you make of this?
Well, it's silly. You know, by Mr. Farris's reasoning, we could end up adding additional justices every 4 years whenever there's a new president arguably elected. So, look, it's a practical impossibility, and here's why. As you pointed out in your intro, Franklin Roosevelt tried this in 1937 by adding 6 additional justices. It requires, however, as FDR found out, a legislative act, a bill passed by both houses of Congress and signed by the president. His efforts were viewed as so devious and underhanded, even by Democrats, that his bill didn't even get out of committee. It's anathema to the principles that have been established since 1869, when 9 justices became the rule.
So, Tammy, you were very fired up during that conversation.
Well, it's quite disingenuous, I think. Look, there's a reason why it's a lifetime appointment, so that you are not vulnerable to political pressure. That's the entire point. This is what you don't want them to have to deal with. This is a deliberative body. It should not be a responsive body or a reactionary body, and yet it is a reflection of how the left views it, which is their implementer of their social justice, their social change. They've used the courts, in fact, to do that because they can't convince the American people on the merits. Yeah. I would also argue that this argument, as was Roosevelt's, was part of the action is to intimidate the sitting judges now, to suggest that if you do not, it's like a batterer. If you do not comply, we will hurt you. So, and I think that is the underlying argument about what this really is all about.
I just want to bring David back in on that point, because I think it's the crucial point. It's not supposed to be this body that is political in the way that you want it to be.
Right, but I think that we can see from what's happening in our politics today that the fact that Supreme Court justices have lifetime tenure means that these battles take on this really terrible significance in our politics. It creates a zero-sum battle over these court appointments. And if you just amended the Constitution, you could actually also do it with a simple law.
Okay, thanks, David. Sorry, we don't have too much time. You made that point very clearly. Let me get Charlie and Lisa in quickly. Charlie first.
And Tammy made a great point. But what is a judge? Is a judge an activist, or is it an interpretation of the law? See, we believe that the judge should be an independent arbiter in an interpretation of the law. They think it should be a political activist to advance their agenda. He's upset because we have 5 justices now that will look at what the text says, not what they hope it says. This is a war on the Constitution. This is a war on the rule of law. And he's unsettled that we can't get Medicare for all or free housing or free health care quick enough, because that's a threat to his own political agenda.
Also, his book is called It's Time to Fight Dirty, so you sort of see where he's coming from, obvious point. Also, elections have consequences, and you know how many people Hillary Clinton has confirmed to the Supreme Court? 0, because she lost. President Trump has had 2 because he won. That is how it works. And this is what Democrats do, as you pointed out earlier. When they lose, they try to change the game. When President Trump won, we have to get rid of the Electoral College, and then also calling for defectors, faithless electors to defect, or for faithless electors. But what's hilarious is that more people went against Hillary Clinton with that than President Trump, so it backfired in her face with that.
One correction. Mr. Ferris continues to say of this division in this dynamic. There is no division. It's only the Democrats that get upset. We've never done that. Okay. Nobody else has had a problem.
Thanks, everyone. David, there's one other thing. You know, I just got to say, thanks for coming on and debating it. But when the left's reaction to leaders in other countries, whether that's Erdogan in Turkey or the populists when it's populists doing it in Hungary, trying to mess around with the judiciary, they're authoritarians and they're tearing up the rule of law. But you want to do it here. So I don't know. I think it feels very self-serving, but I appreciate you coming on to debate it. Thank you very much.